Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning into the Liberty Report. This is the day we do Mythbusters, and the co-host is Chris Rossini. Chris is also the editor of the RonPaulLibertyReport.com. Chris, welcome to the program today.
Great to be with you again, Dr. Paul.
Wonderful. There are a lot of things that we can talk about, and of course we spend a lot of time talking about the importance of the election and what that has to do with the foreign policy and domestic policy. But I'm sure we can't get by without mentioning, the consequences of the election, but we'd like to touch on an important subject. And what is that subject for today?
Yes, the Federal Reserve has been hiding from the news for quite a long time now, so it's time to get back to work on the Fed. So let's get started. We're going to talk about inflation specifically today. And many, in fact, most Americans believe that inflation is a rise in prices. But a rise in prices is just an effect, and if you just focus on the effect, the cause can hide in the shadows. So, Dr. Paul, please talk about the cause of the rise in prices.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. If you just look at prices going up and distortion of different prices of different commodities, then you miss the point. Where does it all start? And we've had great economists, including Milton Friedman, say inflation is always a monetary phenomenon. And yet some of those same individuals are very much inflationists, and they claim that one of the reasons we had a long depression in the 30s is they wouldn't inflate long enough, and failing to point out really the mischief of the Federal Reserve during the 1920s. But first off, I think people have to understand the definition, because 99 times out of 100, if they talk about inflation on TV, or most professors, it's always rising prices, and they talk about general price levels. That is not the correct way to look at this. And they will also say that, deflation is when prices go down. But they'd never distinguish that prices go down when you increase productivity. And so that's another variable in there. And all of a sudden they get distorted to the point where they associate economic growth with rising prices. If you don't have economic growth, then the Federal Reserve embarks on a position say, what we need is to have rising prices, then we're going to have economic growth. They got it all twisted. You can have, because if you have a healthy free market economy and you get the central banks out of the way, and you have economic growth and productivity and advancement economically, prices go down. The value of your purchasing power go up. Real wages go up. But they don't see it that way, and they don't want to see that way, because that would put the central bank out of business, and they have to be the orchestrators of the economy. They're economic planners. They're actually taxers. They run a tax system because they want big government, and therefore, if they just print money, they don't have to go and directly raise taxes. But there is a big difference between looking at prices going up and looking at money supply going up. I want to put a chart up to show what happened since this last recession started, and the recession that we're in, to show what has happened to the money supply. And there it is. It's a chart that's been seen a lot of times. It gradually is rising, on the left-hand part from the 90s on up until when that recession hit. And the monetary base at that time was around $800 billion. And then the calamity hit, and they did not want to do what they thought they did wrong in the Depression. They didn't print enough money. Instead of liquidating debt and allowing the market to adjust itself, as it did in 1921, they said, we're going to stop this recession. So they printed and had QEs, and look at what happened to the money supply. That's inflation. That's where it started. And then the Fed became very annoyed because the money wouldn't circulate. The markets didn't respond to the way they wanted. And they thought, well, they'll get economic stimulus and prices will start to rise and wages will go up. And they work on the assumption that inflation, inflating the money supply, isn't all that bad, because prices will go up, but wages will go up and profits will go up and everybody will be happy. It doesn't work that way. It never has worked that way, because some prices go up much faster than others. And they kept reassuring themselves during this recession that everything is okay because there's not a whole lot of inflation and the cost of living isn't going up, which was a lie. They did it purposely. They distorted the numbers. But it was true that some prices were going up much faster, like the stock prices were going up, healthcare was going up, the government was involved in that. When we had the housing bubble, the house costs were going up. Medical care skyrockets when we have Obamacare. So they can print money and they can have a mathematical formula on what it's supposed to do, but they're never right. And this is the wonderful thing that's happened to the Fed. They are on the defensive right now. In these last 10 years, they've been so wrong on everything that they've done, and they don't have much left. And it's mainly because they won't define it, and they have these false principles of what wealth is. They think if you print money, you have wealth, which is not true. You just dilute the wealth from this. And they have to understand how prices come about and why they do vary, because they don't understand and they reject the whole notion of what Austrians teach, and that is that prices have a subjective element to it. And just because you and I might think that such and such should be a certain price because the money supply went up a lot, if they doubled the money supply, it would be wrong for us to say, well, the cost of a loaf of bread is going to double. That is not the case. In the old days, even during Adam Smith's time, when they understood about free markets, they were still accepting the notion that value comes from labor, the labor theory of value. And this it gives the philosophic background for socialism and communism, because they want labor to be reimbursed rather than by the market. They want it to be reimbursed with a mathematical formula. And that doesn't happen. Only productivity tells you where the money should go. And under this situation of free market pricing, to sort out the mistakes and try to change things, is that they get these messages, and then they confuse everybody by just avoiding them and let the people go. So it's the market economy that can sort this all out, but the mischief on inflation starts where I showed you just this chart. It's the creation of new money with the pretense that it's going to solve all our problems, and of course that is not the case. A better understanding of monetary policy would have prevented all these problems that we've had all the way back to the Great Depression and the inflation of the 70s, the doldrums that we're in today, the financing, where there's so many things that could have been prevented if we would have had a better understanding of the cause and effect of why prices go up, because people get hurt when prices go up, obviously.
The next major error/myth that we're going to cover is when the Fed counterfeits dollars and the money ends up going into the stock market or the real estate market. The Fed chairman is hailed as a genius. I remember Alan Greenspan was referred to as the maestro. However, when the money goes into consumer prices or drives up the price of gasoline and oil prices, the Fed has to go into damage control. Dr. Paul, please describe why both scenarios are actually bad for the economy.
Well, they never want to blame the Fed for a problem. I remember this clearly in the 70s when Nixon put on wage and price controls, closed the gold window. We were in a deep recession essentially for a whole decade. And nobody really on the TVs or financial statement, nobody would suggest, because, and even like today, they don't want to say, well, it's all the Fed's fault. What they said was, well, it was OPEC, oil prices went up. And that filtered through the economy, and everybody had to have oil and gasoline, and that was the source of the inflation of prices. And yet, of course, that wasn't true. So other people who were the more conservative say, no, it's the labor unions. The labor prices are going up. And there is some truth to a problem that is created by artificially pushing labor prices up, with union power given to them by the government. But prices of labor should be determined by the market. And if labor goes up, because if there's a healthy economy and somebody's very productive, their real wages are definitely going to go up. In the Industrial Revolution, that did happen. When Ford gave his workers $5 a day, it was gigantic, but nobody should have ever called that inflation and was bad. But in the 70s, it was blame the unions, blame wages, blame OPEC, but it never said blame the Fed, for what they're doing. And yet everything the Fed does is mischief. It's a distortion. They finance the welfare state, which is a distortion and affects labor and the incentives to work. It affects, our ability to satisfy the special interests, like the military-industrial complex and building weapons we don't need. And another thing that was just horrible that came out of the Depression was when the system wasn't working, and this is a thought that still lingers, is that they finally got out of the Depression with a war. And of course, that's a horrible thought. And wars never really improve the living conditions of the people. Maybe a few people who make bombs and airplanes, they might have an improvement. But it's not an economic true stimulus. It's a negative because you're not doing anything to help. But ultimately, this whole thing that the Fed is involved in, it promotes big government, and big government can't get big unless it undermines the personal liberties of the people and undermines the market economy or interferes with the market economy. So this is why it is so dangerous, and there's nothing good that can come of it. For years, though, they were involved since 1913, even though they really messed up in the 30s. We've had a lot of ups and downs and recessions, but the Fed escaped blame because they would say, well, we're having a good time now. We're in a positive growth period. Thank the Fed for it. They're keeping the interest rates where they're supposed to be. And then when the recession hit, which was inevitable, the Fed would wait a couple of years and let a little liquidation of debt occur. And then the Fed would come to the rescue and start printing more money. So the Fed was getting credit for temporarily solving a problem they created. And they've lived with that reputation. But it's the end of the line now, which tells me that we're at the end of a stage where central banking and fiat money is not working as they have planned. But basically, it should be seen as a moral issue, which is very bad, because if an individual went out and they did have the printing press machine, the real printing press machine, and they could print Federal Reserve notes, and nobody could tell the difference, it would be illegal, immoral, and a very serious crime. But for a while, those people who got to spend those dollars, they were doing quite well. But eventually, though, as this filtered through the economy, more and more people had more money without production, so the payment will be higher prices. And that, of course, is what we're facing today, because a lot of people suffer more than others, and that's really where the discrepancy comes. And this is part of the anger that has existed prior to and during this election period, is that a predictable event is that the very wealthy and those who get the money first, the government, the banks, the banks, and also the big corporations, Wall Street, and the ability to buy more stocks and bid up those prices, they would benefit. But the prediction has come true, according to Austrian economics, is that if you systematically undermine the value of a currency, you're going to wipe out the middle class. And lo and behold, that's exactly what is happening. The middle class is being wiped out, and yet they don't quite see it. Now we have the rise of populism. We have to do more to help the poor. We have to take away some of the benefits from the rich and print the money but give it directly to the poor. And we need more protectionism and all the populist, the unfounded philosophy in populism. They want to use that to try to compensate. Of course, I argue the case that is not going to compensate for it. That cannot substitute for sound money and a free market and absolute freedom in pricing. And of course, that would mean that you can't correct these things by, if real wages don't go up, you can't correct it by, artificially pushing wages up. In the Depression, they artificially kept wages from falling. And today we live, and even this current election period, you saw, the initiatives, and the ones that had the initiative said, oh, the poor people are poor and we have to do something, so we're going to force people to raise the minimum wage. May well have been well motivated and they cared about the poor, but they're just making the problem worse. It adds to unemployment. It tries to temporarily cover the mistakes of the Federal Reserve and printing press money. So that hardly is the solution. But people have to realize if there's a problem out there, whether it's too much spending, too much debt, too much taxes, too many wars, too much welfareism, too much abuse in the system, too many government employees, you have to look to who does the financing. None of that could be financed if you didn't have a system of money that the Federal Reserve comes to the rescue and just be able to buy that debt. And they've been able to get away with this for a lot longer than anybody ever dreamed they could. And right now, though, while we're up against a wall, is that most people are realizing that the end is coming, and election or not, we still face a bleak future, economically speaking.
Yes, before we get to our last question, I just want to reiterate a great point that you made, that when prices start to rise and the economic bust comes, you can count on the media, the government, and the Fed to start pointing fingers at anyone but themselves. And it's very important for Americans to understand that if you're going to point fingers, it has to be at the source, not just worry about the effect, but the source, which is the Fed. Let's finish up, Dr. Paul. We're going to have a new president come January, and Donald Trump has a lot of proposals that he ran on and got elected. What do you think about his proposed foreign and domestic policies? And do you think that they're going to usher in a rise in the cost of living for Americans?
Well, to the very last question, will it cause a rise in the cost of living for the Americans? Yes, but I would not put all the blame on Trump. And just like I did not put the blame on Obama for the recession. I put the blame on Obama for participating in the prolongation of it along with the Federal Reserve. And if Trump follows through with his spending policies, he will be a participant in it, but he will not be cause of the problem. The problem comes, really from that original chart I showed where this monetizing of debt over the last 9 years is the real problem, this five-fold increase in the monetary base, which has yet to really be discounted in the market and it circulate. So that's where the real problem is that we have to deal with. But the reason why I think we're going to see an igniting of price inflation, one, it's already started. Even before the election, we started to see some prices moving. One that was fascinating, and I might have a chart on this too, was the price on copper. Copper has traditionally been an indicator that we have, that economists have used for years on when the cycles that the Fed creates have seemed to improve and there would be a growth period, that copper was one of the first things to go up. They would be anticipating, well, okay, there's been a liquidation of debt, the housing bubble has eliminated itself, and building of houses are coming back, and you need copper for the pipes and things like that. So even before the building starts, copper prices were an inch up. And it has been inching up. And in the last couple of days, it's been skyrocketing. And you say, well, isn't that good news? Because maybe they're going to go back and the millennials are all going to buy houses now. No, I think this time the message from copper is a little bit different than ushering in a new growth period. What it's ushering in is a new spending period because, the consensus now, I think it's a bipartisan consensus, and this is one thing that Trump might be able to pull it off because it's bipartisan that monetary policy hasn't worked very well, and therefore they say what we need is more spending. We need more spending by the government. So the new administration is committed to massive expansion of money on highways and infrastructure, and also a massive rebuilding of the military. Guess what? They use copper and other metals prices are going up too. So I think the inflation monetarily is there, and there's going to be this incentive. The psychology is going to change. I think one of the most fascinating things that's happened since the election last week is the huge increase in interest rates, and everybody's been dreading interest rates. And this was the market driving the interest rates up, or the anticipation. It wasn't the Fed all of a sudden saying, well, we're going to really pump up the interest on the 10-year Treasury, because they were so frightened that if they did that, it would crash the stock market. But here the market comes along, and the interest rates go up significantly, and all of a sudden the stocks went up too. Before, anytime the Fed hinted they were going to raise the interest rates a little bit, the stock markets would go down. But here the stock markets went up. And even in the bond market, it just is a reflection of how unstable this whole thing is. Because in the last week, there was over $1 trillion lost in the value of bonds, because when the price of a bond goes up, it goes down, the interest rates go up. So interest rates went up on 30-year bonds and all, which, if you look at this is going to mean the cost of paying those notes and all the debt that we have is going to go up. So yes, if they're printing more money to drive the interest rates down, that's one thing. But with interest rates going up, it's also inflationary too, in the sense that if people want to go out and do anything, they're going to have to pay a higher rate of interest. Where it will be helpful, though, are the people who are the savers and who have been cheated by the Fed and by the politicians for so long. Because if you're frugal and you want to be self-reliant and you save your money and have a CD, you're not earning any interest. But the problem with what's happening now is it's so artificial. We haven't really changed the Fed, but we're still working with the Fed, because right now, even though interest rates have gone up a little bit, in a significant amount, but if the spending continues and they go up too fast, anybody who's in any administration, any president is going to go to the Fed and say, don't make it worse. You're going to make the economy worse, so don't do this. Don't let the economy dictate interest rates. So we have a long way to go, and I think the problems are so built into the system, whether it's monetary, whether it's regulatory, and there are some good things that Trump says about lower taxes and lower regulations, but not the structural defects in the economy and the spending that is coming. And the inability to finance that without a Federal Reserve. So we still have a long way to go, because reversal from a bankrupt system, a system that doesn't work anymore, a Federal Reserve that really doesn't work anymore, that problem isn't solved easily, even if you try to tinker on the edges, which is worth trying. I'm certainly for lowering taxes and lowering regulation. It's going to help a little bit. But it's not going to all of a sudden get a job for those 94 million people who are out of the workforce. And it's not going to all of a sudden get the millennials feeling good about their debt, because the debt overhang in the world, there's $360 trillion of debt, and it's all related, to the fiat dollar standard, because it's the reserve standard, and through fractional reserves. And if you allow that to unwind, you would really have deflation. So they're not going to allow that to happen, but they are going to keep doing what they're doing, and that'll eventually destroy the value of the currency. And if you look at the value of the dollar each day compared to the other currencies, you might say, the dollar's been up, the dollar's strong, and all this. But ultimately, it's what the dollar purchases and what it buys will make all the difference, and that's the backside of what will the cost of living do. The cost of living has already been going up much too fast. The people know it. The people are angrier than anybody ever dreamed, even that I suspected, because their cost of living is way high, and they don't buy into the lies that we've been told about the economics or anything else. And this is the reason that people are very, very unhappy, and why we have a change. So it'll be interesting to see how this pans out. But I want a philosophic change, because I do not believe for a minute that you can tinker and have a tactical or technical changes in any policies and really have a miraculous recovery. I think you have to address finally the subject of the role of government, how big government should be. Should they run up debt? Should we print the money to pay the debt? Should we regulate more so because there'll be mistakes made? And should we use it as a taxing authority? As long as that exists, we're going to march on and do these kind of things until the purchasing of the power of the dollar will be destroyed. And already, I think that is starting. But I do want to thank the audience, obviously, for being with us today. And thank you, Chris, for helping us out today on Mythbusters.
My pleasure. Thank you, Dr. Paul.
Very good. And to our viewers, I want to thank you once again for being with us. And please come back soon.